I got married to my ex's brother and on the honeymoon discovered his revenge. I found the video file accidentally while using his laptop. The thumbnail showed my husband and my ex laughing together with the file name Operation Payback. As I pressed play, I realized with horror that my fairy tale romance and dream wedding had all been an elaborate setup from the very beginning. 2 years ago, my world shattered when I caught my boyfriend of 5 years, Daniel, cheating on me with my college roommate. The betrayal was bad enough, but the humiliation that followed was unbearable. Daniel didn't just leave me, he destroyed me. He told all our mutual friends that I was emotionally unstable and suffocating him. He even had the audacity to invite my roommate to our friend group's gatherings while excluding me. Overnight, I lost my boyfriend, my best friend, and most of my social circle. I spent months rebuilding myself. New job, new apartment, new friends. I deleted all social media for a year, just to escape the constant reminders of my former life. By the time I re-emerged, I felt stronger, but the wound still ached whenever I saw pictures of Daniel and my ex-roommate, now officially a couple and apparently adored by everyone we once knew together. That's when Ethan entered my life. I'd met him briefly years ago, Daniel's younger brother by 2 years, the wild child of the family who had been traveling abroad during most of my relationship with Daniel. He found me on Instagram and messaged me out of nowhere. "Hey Olivia, not sure if you remember me. I'm back in town and could use a friendly face. Coffee sometime?" I was hesitant, of course. Meeting my ex's brother seemed like asking for trouble, but something about his message intrigued me. And honestly, there was a small, vengeful part of me that liked the idea of connecting with a member of Daniel's family after how he'd discarded me. Our coffee meeting turned into dinner. Ethan was everything Daniel wasn't: spontaneous, passionate, and seemingly without pretense. He made me laugh for the first time in months. He told me he'd had a falling out with Daniel years ago, that they barely spoke. When I asked about his return to the city, he said he'd taken a job at an architecture firm and was ready to put down roots. "Daniel was an idiot for what he did to you," he told me that night. "He always did take the best things in his life for granted." Looking back, those words should have been my first clue. Our relationship moved quickly. Too quickly, though I was too caught up to notice. Ethan was intoxicating, the whirlwind romance I'd never experienced with practical, predictable Daniel. Within 2 months, we were inseparable. By 4 months, he had moved into my apartment. At 6 months, during a surprise weekend trip to the coast, he proposed on a clifftop overlooking the ocean. "I know it's fast," he said, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." I said yes without hesitation. The ring was stunning, a vintage emerald that he claimed had belonged to his grandmother. I later learned that was the first of many lies. The wedding planning was a blur. Ethan pushed for a big celebration, though I would have been happy with something intimate. He insisted on an elaborate venue, a designer dress, hundreds of guests, many of whom I barely knew. I assumed his family was wealthy and didn't question how we were affording it all. He said he wanted to give me the wedding of my dreams after everything I'd been through. When I suggested not inviting Daniel and my former roommate to avoid awkwardness, Ethan surprised me by insisting they come. "They're in the past," he said. "Having them see how happy we are, that's the best revenge, isn't it?" I reluctantly agreed, comforted by the thought of Daniel watching me marry his brother, seeing that I had moved on to someone better than him. When I walked down the aisle and saw Daniel's uncomfortable expression, I felt a moment of vindication. I mistakenly thought it was because he was jealous. Our wedding was perfect. Ethan was attentive, charming, and seemed genuinely in love. When we left for our honeymoon in Bali the next day, I was floating on cloud 9. The resort was breathtaking, a private villa with an infinity pool overlooking the Indian Ocean. On our 3rd night, Ethan got called away for what he claimed was an urgent work call. He left his laptop open on the balcony table. I wasn't snooping, not really. I just wanted to check my own email while he was busy. But when I moved the mouse, the screen woke to a folder labeled Operation Payback, with dozens of video files. The thumbnail on one showed Ethan and Daniel together, both smiling widely. Confused, I clicked play. Day 83 of Operation Payback. Ethan's voice narrated as the video showed him standing in his apartment, an apartment I'd never seen before. The target continues to fall for everything. She actually believes I'm estranged from you, bro. The camera panned to reveal Daniel sitting on a couch, raising a beer in salute. Is she still doing that annoying laugh when she's nervous? Daniel asked. God, yes, Ethan replied. I've gotten better at not cringing when she does it. Small price to pay for what we're pulling off. My blood ran cold as I quickly opened more files. Hours of footage. Ethan documenting our entire relationship, as if it were some sick anthropological study. Him and Daniel strategizing. Detailed expenses showing money transferred from Daniel to fund what they called the ultimate revenge plot. In one particularly painful video dated just 2 weeks before our wedding, Ethan spoke directly to the camera. Almost there. The family ring is a nice touch. She has no idea it's just cubic zirconia. I've convinced her to invite all her new friends to the wedding. Everyone will be there to see the big finale. Daniel, I still think we should wait until the reception for the reveal, but I'll defer to you since this whole thing was your idea. My hands shook so badly I could barely click through the files. I found a document titled Settlement that outlined an agreement between the brothers. Daniel would pay for everything, the wedding, the honeymoon, even the apartment Ethan and I had been living in, and in exchange, Ethan would execute what they described as the public humiliation of Olivia, Bennett as repayment for her actions. My actions. What had I supposedly done to deserve this? The document referenced an attached file, which turned out to be emails between Daniel and his friends from around the time of our breakup. In them, Daniel claimed I had systematically sabotaged his previous relationships out of insecurity, that I had threatened self-harm when he tried to break up with me, and that I had spread rumors about him and his family when he finally left. All lies. Complete fabrications to justify his cheating and generate sympathy from our friends. The final video in the folder was the most chilling. Dated the day before our wedding, it showed Ethan and Daniel reviewing what appeared to be a PowerPoint presentation titled The Unmasking. Slides containing private texts I'd sent Ethan, edited photos that made innocent situations look compromising, and even intimate photos I thought only Ethan had seen. So tomorrow, after the father-daughter dance, you'll take the microphone for your special toast, Daniel was saying. The video plays, everyone sees what a psycho she really is, and you publicly annul the marriage on the spot. Ethan nodded, looking excited. She'll never recover from this. Not just dumped, completely exposed in front of everyone she knows. Perfect justice, Daniel replied, clinking his glass against his brother's. The video ended, and I sat frozen, in shock. Their plan had been to destroy me at the reception, but that hadn't happened. Instead, we'd left for our honeymoon with the marriage intact, and me none the wiser. Something had changed their timeline, but what? I heard Ethan's footsteps, returning to the villa. Quickly, I closed the laptop and moved to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. As the truth sank in, my mind raced through options. I was thousands of miles from home, in a foreign country, legally bound to a man who had married me as part of an elaborate revenge scheme. My honeymoon had just become a hostage situation, and I had no idea what these brothers had planned for me now. Update 1. I spent 20 minutes in that bathroom, silently sobbing while trying to formulate a plan. Ethan knocked several times, asking if I was okay. I managed to choke out that I wasn't feeling well. Food poisoning, perhaps. He sounded concerned. The perfect, caring husband. Knowing it was all an act made me physically ill. When I finally emerged, face washed and composure somewhat restored, Ethan was sitting on the bed looking at his phone. The laptop was now closed and moved to the desk. Feeling better? He asked, sounding genuinely concerned. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My mind raced with questions. Why hadn't they executed their plan at the wedding? What were they planning now? Was I in physical danger? Maybe we should have a quiet night in, he suggested, moving to put his arm around me. It took everything in me not to recoil from his touch. Instead, I forced a weak smile and agreed, saying I just needed rest. That night, I pretended to sleep while cataloging every possible escape route. We were scheduled to stay in Bali for another 11 days. My passport was in the room safe. I checked while Ethan was showering. My credit cards were still in my wallet. At least he hadn't taken those. The next morning, I claimed to feel better and suggested we continue with our planned excursion to a nearby temple. I needed to appear normal while I figured out my next steps. As we toured the ancient structure, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Are you safe? It's Megan, Daniel's cousin. We need to talk. I know what they planned." I stared at my phone in shock. Megan? I'd met her only briefly during my relationship with Daniel. She'd been friendly, but distant. How did she have my number? How did she know? While Ethan was distracted taking photos, I quickly replied, "Not safe to talk. What happened at the wedding? Why didn't they go through with it?" 3 dots appeared then. I stopped them, threatened to tell their parents everything. They postponed, not canceled. Be careful. Can you get away? My heart raced. In Bali. Limited options. What are they planning now? Not sure. But they've been talking daily. Daniel wired more money yesterday. Can you come home early? I glanced at Ethan, who was now approaching with a smile. We'll try. Thank you, I typed quickly before putting my phone away. That afternoon, I suggested to Ethan that we should check our work emails at a cafe with better Wi-Fi than our villa. Once there, while he was ordering drinks, I quickly booked a flight home for the following day using my own credit card. Then I sent an email to my closest friend from my new social circle, Zoe, telling her I was in trouble and needed her to pick me up from the airport without telling anyone. That night, Ethan received another work call and stepped outside. I took the opportunity to search his suitcase and found a small camera hidden in a toiletry bag. They were still documenting everything. Were they planning to spring their revelation once we returned home in front of a different audience? Left the camera untouched. Better to let them think I was still oblivious. The next morning, I executed my plan. While we were having breakfast on our villa's terrace, I pretended to receive an urgent call from my boss. "There's a crisis with the Johnson account," I told Ethan, trying to sound distressed. "They're threatening to pull their business unless I personally intervene. I have to go back." Ethan looked annoyed but not suspicious. "Can't someone else handle it? We're on our honeymoon." "It's millions of dollars, Ethan. I could lose my job." I touched his hand, hating myself for the performance. "You should stay and enjoy the rest of the trip. The resort is paid for, and there's no reason both of us should miss out." He pushed back initially, but eventually agreed when I suggested he invite a friend to join him instead, to make use of the second ticket. I was counting on him not wanting to be alone if he could maintain the facade by having me leave instead. By that evening, I was on a plane back to the United States, leaving my new husband in Bali. The wedding ring he'd placed on my finger just days earlier was tucked in my carry-on bag. I couldn't bear to wear it a moment longer. Zoe met me at the airport as promised, her face etched with concern. In her car, I finally broke down, telling her everything I'd discovered. She took me to her apartment rather than the home I'd shared with Ethan. "We need to get ahead of this," she said after I'd finished my story. "Whatever they're planning, we have to strike first." "But I don't have proof," I realized aloud. "I saw the videos, but I didn't think to copy anything." "We'll figure it out," Zoe assured me. "First, we need to make sure you're safe, then we'll work on exposing them." That night, as I tried to sleep on Zoe's couch, my phone pinged with a message from Ethan. "Hope you landed safely. Miss you already. Love you." Each word was a dagger. I turned off my phone, unable to continue the charade even via text. Whatever game the brothers were playing, I was no longer a willing participant. I just didn't realize then how dangerous it would be to quit in the middle of their game. Update 2. 3 days after I fled Bali, Ethan returned home early. I was still staying with Zoe, having not returned to the apartment Ethan and I had shared. He called repeatedly, each voicemail sounding increasingly concerned about my whereabouts. I didn't answer. Megan, Daniel's cousin, had become my unexpected ally. We met at a coffee shop in a neighborhood far from my usual haunts. She brought printouts of text messages between Daniel and Ethan that she'd managed to screenshot from Daniel's phone during a family dinner. "I've always known Daniel was vindictive," she explained, "but this crossed every line. When I found out what they were planning at the wedding, I couldn't let it happen." The messages confirmed everything I'd seen in the videos. The brothers had been planning this for nearly a year. Daniel had been furious when our mutual friends initially took my side after our breakup. Even though he'd eventually turned many of them against me, he'd never forgotten that initial rejection. The entire scheme had been his idea. But Ethan had embraced it enthusiastically. Why would Ethan agree to this? I asked, still struggling to understand. He didn't even know me. Megan looked uncomfortable. Ethan has always lived in Daniel's shadow. This was his chance to be the hero in Daniel's story. Plus, she hesitated. What? I pressed. Daniel promised to help Ethan with his gambling debts. They're substantial. This wasn't just about revenge. Ethan needed the money. The pieces clicked into place. The lavish lifestyle Ethan had pretended to have, the expensive dates, the dream wedding, all funded by Daniel with money he could spare but Ethan desperately needed. So why didn't they go through with the revelation at the wedding? I asked. I threatened to tell your parents what they were doing, Megan said. They're the only people Daniel still respects, or fears. But I only bought you time. They've revised their plan. According to the recent texts she showed me, the brothers now intended to stage an intervention of sorts with our closest friends. They would present their evidence of my supposed instability and manipulative behavior, paint Ethan as the victim who had tried to help me by marrying me, and then publicly end the relationship while offering me the help I needed. It would seem compassionate to outsiders while still achieving their goal of humiliating me and destroying my reputation. They're planning it for this Friday, Megan said. At your apartment. They've already invited several of your friends. My mind raced. Friday was just 2 days away. I need to warn everyone. Be careful, Megan cautioned. Daniel has been very convincing. Some people may already believe their version of events. She was right. When I started reaching out to friends, the responses were mixed. Some were immediately supportive, horrified by what I told them. Others were hesitant, mentioning that Ethan had already spoken to them about my increasingly erratic behavior and sudden departure from our honeymoon. He seemed really worried about you, my friend Taylor told me. Said you've been acting strange since the wedding, and then you just left him in Bali with no real explanation. They had anticipated my moves and were already working to undermine my credibility. Classic abuser tactics. Isolate the victim and make them seem unstable so no one believes them. But they had made one critical mistake. They hadn't found Zoe. My newest friend wasn't connected to my old social circle and wasn't on their radar, and Zoe worked as a digital forensic specialist. If they're stupid enough to keep evidence on their devices, I can help you find it, she said when I explained the situation. But we need access to either Ethan's laptop or Daniel's phone. Getting either seemed impossible until Megan called with an unexpected opportunity. Daniel left his laptop at our parents' house after dinner. I can get you in tonight while they're at the theater. You'll have about 3 hours. It was risky, but I was desperate. That evening, Megan snuck me into the family home I'd visited many times during my relationship with Daniel, but never expected to enter again. The familiar surroundings made my skin crawl. Daniel's laptop was in the guest room he used when visiting. Megan left me with it while she kept watch downstairs. To my amazement, it wasn't even password protected, a testament to his arrogance. Zoe had given me a USB drive with software that could quickly copy specific file types. I plugged it in and let it run while I searched through his emails and messages. What I found exceeded even my worst expectations. The Operation Payback folder contained everything: the original planning documents, communications with Ethan, video recordings of their planning sessions, and most damning of all, a document where Daniel explicitly acknowledged that his accusations against me were fabricated. Need to create a villain to justify our response, he had written. Standard character assassination, mental instability, manipulative behavior, threats when abandoned. No one questions when these claims are made about women. They just nod and say she seems so normal and accept it. I copied everything, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and vindication. As the USB drive completed its work, I noticed a subfolder I hadn't opened yet, labeled Insurance. Inside were videos of Ethan with various women, all dated during the period he was supposedly committed to me, some even after our engagement. Daniel had been keeping evidence to control his brother too. Just as I removed the USB drive, Megan texted urgently, "They're coming back early. Get out now." I barely made it out through the back door before headlights illuminated the front of the house. Clutching the USB drive containing my salvation, I ran to where Zoe was waiting in her car 2 blocks away. "I got it," I told her breathlessly as she pulled away. "I got everything." For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt a glimmer of hope. The brothers had meticulously documented their own conspiracy. Now I just needed to ensure the right people saw it before Friday's intervention. What I didn't realize was that Ethan had already discovered I'd accessed his files in Bali. And unlike me, he hadn't hesitated to copy the evidence of my discovery. The next 48 hours would become a race to see who could expose the other first. Update tree. The morning after obtaining the evidence from Daniel's laptop, I woke to a barrage of text messages and missed calls from various friends. My heart sank as I scrolled through them. "Is it true? Ethan showed us the video." "I can't believe you've been spying on him. Why didn't you just talk to him if you were suspicious? He's worried about you, says you need help." They had accelerated their timeline. Instead of waiting for Friday's planned intervention, Ethan had moved immediately once he realized I had discovered their plot. But rather than admitting the scheme, he had flipped the narrative. According to him, I was the one who had betrayed trust by going through his laptop, and my claims about a revenge plot were delusions stemming from unresolved trauma over my breakup with Daniel. It was clever. By acknowledging I had seen something on his computer but reframing what it meant, he was getting ahead of anything I might reveal. He'd shown our friends carefully edited versions of the videos, removing incriminating segments while keeping enough to make it seem like I had misconstrued innocent conversations between brothers. I called Zoe in a panic. "They're moving faster than we expected," she said after I explained. "We need to accelerate too. I've been going through what you copied. There's more than enough to expose them, but we need to do it strategically." "How?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "They've already reached most of our friends." "Not everyone," Zoe replied. "And not your family, not Daniel and Ethan's parents, not their workplace colleagues, not the extended community." She was right. The brothers were focusing on our immediate social circle, the audience for their planned humiliation, but their scheme relied on containing the narrative. We decided on a 3-pronged approach. First, Zoe would create an undeniable compilation of the most damning evidence. Second, Megan would help get this in front of Daniel and Ethan's parents. And third, I would contact a college friend who now worked as a journalist at a respected digital publication. Throughout the day, Ethan continued his campaign, calling mutual friends, my workplace, and even my parents to express concern about my mental health. He claimed I had become paranoid during our honeymoon, fixating on imagined conspiracies involving him and Daniel, and had fled back home in a delusional state. He was just trying to get me help. My parents called, confused, and worried. I had to tell them everything, including the humiliating truth that I had married a man who had never loved me, who had orchestrated our entire relationship as an act of revenge for his brother. They were horrified but immediately supportive. "We're coming to you," my mom said firmly. "You shouldn't face this alone." By that evening, Zoe had completed the compilation, a devastating 15-minute video showing the brothers planning their scheme in their own words, with dates clearly visible to establish the timeline. It included Daniel explicitly admitting his accusations against me were false, Ethan discussing how he would manipulate me, and their gleeful planning of my public humiliation. Megan arranged to show it to their parents that night, while I met with my journalist friend Aisha. After viewing the evidence, she was stunned. "This isn't just a personal drama, Olivia," she said. "This is a story about how technology enables psychological abuse, about how easily false narratives can be constructed. With your permission, I want to write about this." I hesitated, knowing that going public would mean even more people knowing how thoroughly I'd been deceived. But it would also mean the truth would be documented where the brothers couldn't control it. "Do it," I said finally. "But I want to confront them first." The confrontation came sooner than expected. Around midnight, as I was staying at a hotel my parents had booked for me, I received a text from Ethan. "We need to talk. I know you have something from Daniel's computer. If you agree to return it without sharing it, we can end this quietly. Otherwise, things will get worse for you. It was a threat, but also an admission. He wouldn't be worried about what I had unless it was damaging. I didn't respond. The next morning brought the first seismic shift in the power dynamic. Daniel and Ethan's parents had watched the full, unedited evidence of their son's scheme. Their father, a respected judge, called me directly. "Olivia," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I cannot adequately express my shame and sorrow for what my sons have done to you. Their behavior is inexcusable, and I assure you they will face consequences within our family. Whatever legal steps you choose to take, we will not impede you." Hours later, Aisha's article went live. Digital Gaslighting: How Two Brothers Orchestrated an Elaborate Revenge Marriage. It included selected clips from the evidence, expert commentary on psychological manipulation, and a timeline of the brothers' scheme. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone exploded with messages. From friends apologizing for believing Ethan, from strangers expressing support, from other journalists seeking follow-up interviews. Daniel and Ethan's phones must have been similarly overwhelmed because they both went dark on social media. According to Megan, they were holed up at Daniel's apartment, frantically trying to determine their next move. Their intervention planned for Friday never happened. Instead, I filed for an annulment of the marriage on grounds of fraud, accompanied by a restraining order against both brothers. My attorney, provided pro bono by a friend of my father's, was confident that given the evidence, the annulment would be granted quickly. "What they did likely constitutes several criminal violations as well," she advised. "If you want to pursue charges, we can discuss those options." I wasn't sure about criminal charges yet, but I was certain about one thing. The brothers had lost control of their narrative. The truth was out, documented in their own words and actions, and spreading rapidly beyond their ability to contain it. Their revenge plot had backfired spectacularly. Now they were the ones facing public humiliation, potential legal consequences, and the undeniable evidence of their own malice. As Zoe said when the article first went viral, "They spent a year planning your worst day. They never planned for their own." Update 4. 6 months have passed since that chaotic week when my world turned upside down for the second time. The aftermath of exposing Daniel and Ethan's plot unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. Some devastating, some surprisingly healing. The annulment was granted within weeks, a remarkably swift process given the overwhelming evidence of fraud. The judge's comments were scathing, describing the brothers' actions as a calculated and malicious deception orchestrated with breathtaking cruelty. He also recommended that the prosecutor's office review the evidence for potential criminal charges. Daniel and Ethan initially attempted to claim the videos were taken out of context or partially fabricated, but their defense crumbled when faced with the volume and consistency of the evidence. Their own father refused to help fund their legal defense, a crushing blow to the privileged brothers who had never faced real consequences before. The professional fallout was immediate. Daniel was placed on indefinite leave from his position at the investment firm where he'd worked for years. Ethan, who had barely established himself at his architecture firm, was terminated outright. Their reputations in our city were in tatters. For me, the exposure brought both validation and a new kind of pain. While it was vindicating to have everyone finally know the truth, the relentless media interest meant repeatedly reliving the humiliation and betrayal. I gave one comprehensive interview to Aisha to establish the facts, then declined all other requests, focusing instead on rebuilding my life away from public scrutiny. My parents were my anchors through it all. They temporarily moved into an apartment near mine, providing a safe haven when the attention became overwhelming. My father, normally reserved with his emotions, wept when he told me how proud he was of my strength in confronting the brothers' deception. "You could have hidden from this shame," he said. "Instead, you exposed their darkness to the light. That takes remarkable courage." Friends who had initially believed Ethan's version of events apologized profusely, many sending heartfelt letters expressing their remorse for doubting me. Most of these relationships have slowly been repaired, though some trust has been permanently damaged. A few friendships ended entirely. People who couldn't face their own complicity in believing the worst about me rather than questioning the brothers' narrative. Zoe remained my steadfast ally throughout, eventually becoming the closest friend I've ever had. Her expertise in digital forensics proved invaluable, not just in exposing the plot, but in helping me secure my online presence afterward, when angry supporters of the brothers briefly targeted me with harassment. As for Daniel and Ethan, their paths diverged in the aftermath. Daniel, always more calculating, eventually issued a carefully worded public apology that admitted wrongdoing while attempting to minimize his role, claiming he had never expected Ethan to take their theoretical discussions about revenge so far. It was another lie, of course, but one designed to begin rebuilding his damaged reputation. Ethan, surprisingly, broke ranks with his brother. 3 months after the exposure, he contacted my attorney requesting a private meeting. Against everyone's advice, I agreed to meet him in a neutral location with my lawyer present. The man who arrived barely resembled the charismatic figure who had swept me off my feet. Haggard and humbled, Ethan came with no excuses, only a full confession that expanded on what we already knew. The plot had indeed begun as Daniel's idea, a way to teach me a lesson for supposedly turning friends against him after our breakup. But Ethan admitted he had embraced the scheme wholeheartedly, partly out of loyalty to his brother and partly out of financial desperation due to gambling debts. What began as a short-term deception to embarrass me had evolved into the elaborate wedding scheme as Daniel's bitterness and Ethan's debt both grew. "I came to care for you," Ethan claimed, though he acknowledged such statements held no credibility. Now, that's why I couldn't go through with the wedding revelation. I told Daniel I wanted out, that we should just quietly end things later. He was furious, said I was weak. I didn't respond to his implicit bid for sympathy. Whether he had developed genuine feelings or simply lost his stomach for the cruelty they'd planned made little difference to the damage done. Before leaving, Ethan handed my attorney a USB drive containing additional evidence, texts, emails, and recorded conversations that further implicated Daniel as the mastermind, including explicit threats Daniel had made to expose Ethan's gambling problems if he backed out. It was his final betrayal of his brother, severing whatever toxic bond had united them in their scheme against me. With this new evidence, the district attorney's office finally moved forward with criminal charges against both brothers: fraud, harassment, invasion of privacy, and electronic stalking. Daniel faces more severe charges due to his role as instigator and the evidence of coercion against Ethan. Their cases are still moving through the legal system, with preliminary hearings scheduled for next month. As for me, I've relocated to another city for a fresh start. The viral nature of the story has faded, though occasionally someone recognizes my name, and I see that flash of recognition, sometimes followed by pity, sometimes by awkward curiosity. I've learned to address it directly. Yes, that was me. It's part of my story, but not the defining chapter. I've declined several offers to option my story for books or screen adaptations. Some experiences shouldn't be packaged as entertainment, and I've had enough of my private pain being made public. The hardest long-term consequence has been learning to trust again. I started therapy immediately after discovering the truth and continue weekly sessions. My therapist says that what happened wasn't just a betrayal, but a sustained psychological assault designed to make me question my own perceptions and worth. Healing. From this kind of trauma isn't linear, she reminds me often. You'll have setbacks, moments when trust seems impossible. That's normal. Dating again seems like a distant possibility, though I've recently made a few tentative steps toward opening that door. I'm painfully aware of the warning signs I missed with Ethan: the whirlwind romance, the pressure to commit quickly, the too perfect understanding of exactly what I wanted to hear. Never again will I ignore my instincts when something feels too convenient or perfectly aligned with my desires. Megan has become an unexpected friend through all of this. She recently visited me in my new city, bringing the surprising news that Daniel and Ethan's parents had established a foundation to support victims of psychological abuse and digital harassment. It won't undo what their sons did, but it represents a commitment to prevent others from suffering similar fates. Sometimes I think about the alternate reality where I never discovered those videos in Bali, where I might have returned from our honeymoon to face their planned intervention, blindsided and defenseless against their coordinated attack. In my darkest moments, I wonder if I would have survived such a public humiliation intact. Instead, through luck, courage, and the help of true friends, I exposed the real villains of this story. The brothers who spent nearly a year planning my destruction never imagined they were actually orchestrating their own downfall. There's a certain justice in that symmetry, a reminder that even the most elaborate deceptions eventually unravel when exposed to the light of truth. Update 5. 1 year after discovering the brothers' plot on that fateful honeymoon, I find myself reflecting on the journey from victim to survivor, and finally, to someone who has reclaimed her power and peace. The legal proceedings against Daniel and Ethan concluded 3 months ago with outcomes that brought a measure of justice, if not complete satisfaction. Daniel received a 2-year sentence, though all but 4 months were suspended in favor of probation, community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. Ethan, benefiting from his cooperation and the evidence of Daniel's coercion, received probation and community service without jail time. Both were ordered to pay substantial restitution, which has been directed to organizations supporting victims of psychological abuse and cybercrime. The brothers' public statement after sentencing revealed the continuing gap in their understanding of the harm they caused. While acknowledging their actions were inappropriate and hurtful, their carefully worded apology focused more on the poor judgment of their misguided prank than on the deliberate cruelty of their scheme. They still don't fully recognize what they did as abuse, a failure of empathy that their mandatory counseling will hopefully address. Their parents have maintained their distance from both sons, focusing instead on their foundation work. Judge Richard Bennett, their father, has become an unexpected advocate for expanding legal protections against digital harassment, testifying before state legislators about the gaps in current laws that his own sons exploited. There's a painful authenticity in his advocacy that comes from such personal connection to both sides of this story. As for me, this past year has been one of gradual healing and rebuilding. My new job at a nonprofit focused on digital rights education aligns perfectly with my evolving sense of purpose. I've found meaning in helping others understand the technological tools that can be used for both protection and harm. Several times a month, I speak at colleges and community centers about my experience, warning signs of digital manipulation, and steps for protecting personal privacy. These presentations were terrifying at first. Standing before strangers to discuss the most humiliating chapter of my life seemed impossible. But the responses I've received have transformed this vulnerability into strength. After nearly every talk, someone approaches me privately to share their own story of betrayal or manipulation, often saying, "I thought I was the only one who could fall for something like this." They weren't the only ones. I wasn't the only one. That understanding has been crucial to my healing. My support system has evolved in unexpected ways. Zoe remains my closest friend, now actually living in the same building as me after taking a job in my new city. My parents visit monthly, our relationship deeper and more honest than before this ordeal. And Megan, once a peripheral connection through Daniel, has become a treasured friend. Her courage in standing against her cousins despite family pressure revealed her character in ways that forged a lasting bond between us. The most surprising development has been the gradual return of joy and trust to my life. 6 months ago, I would have said romantic relationships were permanently off the table for me. The idea of being vulnerable with someone new seemed not just frightening, but foolish after what I'd experienced. Then I met Adrian at a digital privacy workshop where I was speaking. As a cybersecurity attorney, he understood the technical aspects of what I'd endured without my having to explain everything. But it was his patience that drew me in, his absolute respect for my boundaries, and his willingness to move at whatever pace felt safe for me. We've been dating for 4 months now, progressing deliberately slowly. Adrian understands when I need to verify information he shares, when certain romantic gestures trigger painful memories of Ethan's manipulation, when I sometimes pull back after moments of vulnerability. Each step toward trust is carefully considered, each decision mindful rather than swept along by emotion. My therapist calls this intentional intimacy, building connection through conscious choice rather than emotional momentum or societal expectations. It's not the whirlwind romance that Ethan orchestrated, but something more genuine and ultimately more meaningful. Last week, Adrian asked if he could introduce me to his parents during their upcoming visit. This simple, normal relationship milestone triggered an unexpected panic attack. The association with meeting Ethan's family, who had been briefed to help sell the deception, suddenly overwhelming. When I explained my reaction, Adrian immediately suggested alternatives without pressure or disappointment. His consistent respect for my healing process is what makes this new relationship possible. I still have moments when the magnitude of what happened hits me anew. Recently, I received a package containing items from my former apartment with Ethan that had been held as evidence, including the false family heirloom engagement ring that had been one small part of their elaborate lie. Seeing it again, I was struck by how this meaningless piece of cubic zirconia had once seemed to represent a future and a love that never existed. Rather than discarding it, I've decided to donate it to an art installation by a survivor-centered organization that transforms symbols of trauma into expressions of resilience. My small contribution to a mosaic piece about deception and truth feels like an appropriate way to repurpose something that once represented such elaborate manipulation. Daniel and Ethan have both attempted to contact me since completing the more intensive portions of their sentences. I've maintained my boundary of no direct communication, a decision my therapist strongly supports. Their desire for forgiveness or closure is not my responsibility to fulfill, and protecting my hard-won peace remains my priority. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing the brothers so publicly instead of just quietly ending the relationship once I discovered the truth. This question misunderstands both the magnitude of their deception and the ongoing threat they represented. Their scheme wasn't just about humiliating me at the wedding, it was a sustained campaign to destroy my reputation, my relationships, and potentially my mental health. Going public wasn't about revenge, it was self-defense. As strange as it may sound, I've found a kind of freedom in surviving this ordeal. Having faced one of my worst fears, public humiliation, intimate betrayal, the questioning of my own judgment, and emerged intact has given me a resilience I never knew I possessed. The brothers spent a year constructing an elaborate trap designed to destroy me, yet here I stand, stronger, wiser, and increasingly whole. There's a quote I keep on my desk from author Glennon Doyle. "The braver I am, the luckier I get." My bravery. In Bali, facing the devastating truth and choosing to act rather than retreat into denial, created the possibility for everything good that has followed. It wasn't luck that saved me from their scheme, it was courage. 1 year later, I no longer define myself primarily as a victim of an elaborate deception. That experience is part of my story, but it doesn't dictate my future or determine my worth. The brothers failed in their fundamental goal. They didn't break me. Instead, they inadvertently set me on a path toward a more authentic life than I had ever imagined possible. One built on hard-earned wisdom about both the darkness and light that humans are capable of creating. The wedding ring I once wore sits in an evidence locker somewhere, no longer symbolizing anything important in my life. The love it falsely promised has been replaced by something far more valuable, the genuine connections I've formed with people who know my whole story and choose to walk alongside me anyway. And most importantly, a renewed relationship with myself. One founded on compassion for my past, awareness in my present, and hope for my future.